Today, millions of people willingly step onto a machine designed to exhaust them. They climb, they sweat, they stare at a wall, and they call it self-improvement. The treadmill is one of the most recognizable symbols of modern health. It lives in our gyms, in our homes, in hotel basements, in corporate wellness programs. It promises discipline, cardio, longevity. But when the treadmill was first invented in 1818, it wasn't built to strengthen the body. It was built to punish it. Not for athletes, not for weight loss, for prisoners. And not for minutes at a time, for hours. So how did a device created to break men in British prisons become the centerpiece of global fitness culture? To understand that, we have to step into a very different kind of room. Not a gym, a prison. Before we enter the 19th century, it's worth pausing on what the treadmill represents today. It's clean, minimal, predictable. You step on, you choose your speed, you stop whenever you want. It measures your progress, tracks your calories, quantifies your effort. It fits perfectly into the modern obsession with productivity. Even exercise is optimized. But there's something strange about it. Unlike running outdoors, the treadmill doesn't take you anywhere. You move, but you remain in the same place. Endless effort, no distance gained. That feature, the endlessness, is not accidental. It was the entire point. And when it was first installed inside prison walls, it wasn't marketed as exercise. It was described as hard labor, and it was meant to hurt. In the early 1800s Britain had a problem. Its prisons were full. Industrialization was transforming cities. Rural workers were flooding into urban centers. Poverty surged. Petty theft increased. Public drunkenness, debt crimes, vagrancy, all punishable by incarceration. The British penal system wasn't designed for reform, it was designed for deterrence. Prison was meant to be unpleasant, visibly unpleasant. But overcrowded prisons created a new issue. Inmates were idle, and idle prisoners were considered dangerous. Reformers and politicians began to argue that prisoners needed structure, labor, exhaustion, moral discipline. Work, they believed, could crush criminal instincts. But there was a complication. Many prisons had no productive labor systems, no factories, no farmland, no organized trades. So administrators asked a brutal question. If prisoners must work, what if the work doesn't need to produce anything at all? What if the suffering itself is the purpose? Enter 1818's English engineer, Sir William Cubitt. Cubitt wasn't a prison warden, he was a mill engineer. He understood rotating wheels, mechanical resistance, human-powered motion. And he believed criminals needed a dull, steady, unremitting labor. Not skill building, not rehabilitation, exhaustion. So he designed a large rotating cylinder with wooden steps fixed around it. Prisoners would climb the steps continuously, like walking up a staircase that never ended. As they climbed, the wheel turned. The machine could be connected to grind corn or pump water, but that was secondary. The real objective was physical depletion. Cubitt believed fatigue would instill obedience. The treadmill was introduced into prisons as a moral instrument, but once installed, it became something else entirely. The machine looked simple, but its scale was enormous. 20 to 30 prisoners could be placed on a single wheel. They stood side by side, separated by partitions, forbidden from speaking, climbing, hour after hour. The silence was mandatory, the motion was relentless, and stepping off without permission was punishable. The treadmill was not just labor, it was a system of control. And in many prisons, it became the most feared punishment of all. Imagine a giant wooden cylinder, 20 feet long, 6 to 8 feet in diameter, fixed with wooden slots across its surface like the steps of an endless staircase. Now imagine it mounted horizontally, slightly elevated from the ground. A guard stands nearby, and lined up along the wheel are prisoners. Each man stands on a narrow plank, separated by wooden partitions so he cannot see or speak to the others. There's no railing in front, only the moving steps beneath his feet. The signal is given, the wheel begins to turn. And if the prisoner does not step upward in rhythm with the slats, he will slip. If he slips, he falls. If he falls, he risks dragging others with him. So he climbs, step, step, step. The staircase never ends. In most prisons, men were forced to walk the treadmill for up to 6 hours a day, but not continuously. That would have been too obvious. Instead, the labor was broken into rotations. 15 minutes climbing, 15 minutes resting, then back on. over and over. By the end of a day, a prisoner might climb the equivalent of 5,000 to 14,000 vertical feet. That is more than scaling a mountain. But unlike scaling a mountain, there was no summit, no view, no reward. Only the same wall in front of you. And the sound, the heavy rhythmic thud of wood turning, the synchronized stepping of exhausted men, the grinding of gears, the overseer's boots on stone floors. Some treadmills were connected to mills to grind corn, others pumped water, but in many cases the mechanical output was deliberately inefficient, because productivity wasn't the point, punishment was. Silence was enforced. Prisoners were forbidden to speak while climbing. The partitions ensured isolation, even while standing inches apart. The treadmill was not just physically exhausting, it was psychologically disorienting. You moved constantly, but went nowhere. You exerted effort, but achieved nothing. In modern terms, we might call it pointless labor. In the 19th century, it was called discipline. Reports from prison inspectors describe men collapsing, vomiting, trembling. Some were fainted and dragged away. Others developed joint damage and chronic back injuries. But administrators saw this as proof the machine was working. Fatigue, they believed, would cleanse the criminal mind. And for decades, the treadmill spread across Britain, then across the empire. But the machine did more than exhaust bodies. It sparked controversy and eventually rebellion. At first, the treadmill was praised. Newspapers described it as modern, efficient, reformative. Politicians called it humane because it replaced public whipping and executions. But inside prison walls, reality was different. The machine did not reform men, it broke them. Reports began to surface of prisoners collapsing mid-step. When one man stumbled, the entire row could be thrown off balance. Falling meant bruised ribs, broken fingers, split skin. Some were forced back onto the wheel immediately after fainting. Guards believed mercy would weaken discipline. In certain prisons, inmates were required to climb blindfolded. In others, the pace was intentionally increased as punishment. The treadmill became not just labor, but escalation. Physical damage. Medical records from the period describe severe joint degeneration, permanent knee damage, chronic spinal injuries, exhaustion-induced hallucinations. But there was something worse than injury: monotony. Men described the treadmill as mentally annihilating. One former prisoner wrote that it felt like being buried alive while standing. Another described the sound of the wheel in his sleep years later. The machine didn't simply tire the body, it erased the sense of time. And for a system supposedly built on moral correction, that created a problem. Public doubt. By the mid-19th century, prison reformers began to question the treadmill's value. Did it reduce crime? There was no evidence. Did it teach skills? No. Did it produce meaningful labor? Often barely. Critics began to call it productive of nothing but pain. Even some prison inspectors admitted the work was excessively severe. But the treadmill had become symbolic. It represented Victorian ideals of discipline, industry, obedience, moral suffering. And dismantling it meant challenging those values. Still, resistance grew. Prisoners protested. Some intentionally injured themselves to avoid it. In certain facilities, riots broke out. By the late 19th century, the tide began to turn. The machine was no longer seen as reformative, it was seen as cruel. And gradually, prison by prison, it was removed. By 1898, treadmill labor was officially abolished in British prisons. The machine that once defined discipline disappeared. Or at least, that's what it seemed. For decades after its abolition, the treadmill largely vanished.
It lingered in historical footnotes, in prison reports, in reform debates. It was a relic of Victorian punishment. But the idea behind it, controlled, measurable exertion, did not disappear. It simply changed environments, from punishment to experiment. In the early 20th century, treadmills resurfaced in an unexpected place: medical laboratories. Researchers began using motorized treadmills to study human endurance. Cardiologists needed a way to measure heart performance under stress. Unlike outdoor running, a treadmill offered control. Speed could be standardized, incline could be adjusted, exertion could be monitored. The machine was no longer about punishment, it was about data. The body became measurable, and effort became quantifiable. The birth of home fitness. But the real transformation happened in the late 1960s. An American mechanical engineer named William Staub read a medical report suggesting that moderate jogging could reduce heart disease. There was one problem: most Americans weren't jogging. So Staub designed a compact home treadmill, small enough to fit in a bedroom. It was called the Pacemaster 600. For the first time, the treadmill wasn't a punishment device, it was self-improvement equipment. By the 1980s and 1990s, fitness culture exploded. Gyms expanded, cardio machines multiplied, calorie counters appeared. The treadmill became a symbol of discipline, but voluntary discipline. You stepped on it by choice. You suffered by choice. You improved by choice. Or at least, that's how it was framed. The psychological echo. But notice what stayed the same. You still move without going anywhere. You still climb an endless incline. You still measure output in numbers, distance, time, calories. The modern treadmill replaced the guard with a screen, replaced punishment with motivation, replaced discipline imposed from above with discipline imposed on yourself. The structure remained, only the meaning shifted. The machine once used to enforce obedience now sells empowerment. And that transformation may say more about us than about the machine itself. The treadmill did not survive because it was efficient. It survived because it fit an idea. In the 19th century, that idea was simple: suffering builds character. In the 20th century, the language changed. Effort builds health. Discipline builds success. Pain builds strength. But look closely, and the architecture is familiar. An enclosed space, measured time, quantified output, endless repetition. Movement without arrival. The Victorian prison used the treadmill to exhaust the criminal body into submission. Modern life uses it to exhaust the anxious body into optimization. The machine itself did not change very much. What changed was the story around it. There's something revealing about that. We like to believe we left behind the harsher mechanisms of the past: public punishments, workhouses, hard labor. But sometimes old technologies don't disappear. They are softened, rebranded, absorbed into everyday life. The treadmill is not a relic, it's a fossil that still moves. And maybe that's why it feels strangely fitting in the modern world. A machine designed for relentless effort, used in an age that never stops running. You step on it voluntarily. You track your numbers. You push yourself to improve. And when you finally press stop, you're still exactly where you began.